You're just a cold, greedy girl who doesn't care if her own brother starves. That's what my mother said to me at Sunday dinner in front of my 7-year-old daughter. And then she slapped me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't even flinch. I sat there with the sting spreading across my left cheek and the taste of copper blooming on the inside of my lip, and I looked at my daughter. Lily was frozen in her chair, fork gripped so tight her knuckles had gone white, eyes wide and filling fast. She didn't blink. She didn't breathe. She just stared at me like the whole world had cracked open and she was waiting to see if I'd fall through. I didn't fall through. I wiped my cheek with the back of my hand. I folded my napkin. I placed it beside my plate. And I said 5 words. Lily, get your coat. But I'm getting ahead of myself. If you've ever had a family member treat you like you didn't matter, hit that like button and subscribe. Let me take you back to the beginning. Not to the slap. To the pattern that made the slap inevitable. My name is Joanna Kirkland. I'm 30 years old. I'm a senior financial analyst at one of the top investment firms in Miami. I've held that position for 4 years, and before that, I spent 3 years working my way up from a junior associate desk where I ate lunch alone and stayed until 9 most nights because I had something to prove, not to anyone at the firm, but to myself. I have $212,000 in liquid savings. I own a home with $450,000 in equity. I built every cent of it on my own, one paycheck at a time, starting from nothing. Actually, that's not true. I didn't start from nothing. I started from negative $46,000. That was the balance of my custodial savings account. My grandfather, my mother's father, had set it up when I was born. He contributed to it every birthday, every Christmas, every time he sold a piece of furniture from his woodworking shop. By the time I was 17, that account held $46,000. It was supposed to be mine when I turned 18. College money, a start in life, the one financial advantage I'd ever been given. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, my parents drained it, every penny gone. When I asked about it, my mother, Marlene, waved her hand like I'd asked about the weather. We used it for family survival, Joanna. The roof needed replacing. Your father's truck broke down. You'll understand when you're older. I was 17. I understood plenty. 3 months after they emptied my account, my brother Corey got a brand new truck for his 16th birthday. Not used, new, lifted suspension, custom wheels, the works. I stood in the driveway and watched him climb into it while my mother clapped and my father, Glenn, stood there with his hands in his pockets, nodding slowly like a man admiring a job well done. Nobody mentioned my $46,000. Nobody mentioned Grandpa's account. Nobody mentioned the college fund that had evaporated into a new roof, a truck repair, and apparently another truck entirely. I told myself it was just how families worked. I told myself they needed it more than I did. I told myself I'd earn it back. And I did. I earned it back 10 times over. But the hole that money left wasn't just financial. It was the first time I understood that in the Kirkland family, there were 2 categories of people, the ones who gave and the ones who took. I was born into the first category, and nothing I ever did would move me into the second. My father, Glenn, is 62. He's a retired electrician who hasn't worked a full week since I was in college. He sits at the head of every table like he built it with his own hands, but the truth is, he hasn't built anything in years. His contribution to family dynamics is silence, not peaceful silence, not thoughtful silence. The kind of silence that watches a woman berate her daughter over mashed potatoes and roast beef and doesn't say a single word, because saying nothing is easier than picking a side, and not picking a side is the same as picking the louder one. Glenn's silence wasn't passive. It was permission. My mother, Marlene, is 58. She has never held a job longer than 14 months. She describes herself as the heart of the family, which is her way of saying she manages everyone's guilt. She calls 3 times a week. She sends group texts with Bible verses on Monday mornings and passive-aggressive comments about ungrateful children by Wednesday night. She signs every card, "Love, Mom," in looping cursive, and she means it the way a landlord means, "Have a nice day" on an eviction notice. And then there's Corey, my brother, 24 years old, 6 years younger than me, the golden child, the baby, the one who got the truck, the attention, the second chances, the third chances, the fourth chances. In 3 years, Corey has started and abandoned 4 businesses, a mobile car detailing service that lasted 2 months, a drop shipping store that never shipped a single product. A cryptocurrency consulting firm that consisted entirely of a website he paid someone $800 to build and never updated, and a pressure washing company that ended when he sold the equipment to cover a bar tab. 4 ventures, 0 revenue, each one funded by Glenn and Marlene, who somehow always found money for Corey's dreams while telling me the family was barely surviving. But here's the part that made it all work. I was the one keeping them afloat. For 24 months, I had been sending my parents $2,400 every single month. That's $57,600 over 2 years. It started as a one-time emergency. Their water heater burst, and the repair estimate was $3,200. I covered it. Then the car insurance lapsed, and they needed $1,100 to reinstate it. I covered that too. Then Marlene called crying about the mortgage being 2 months behind, and before I knew it, I was wired into their monthly budget like a utility they'd never have to cancel. $2,400 a month, every month, automatically transferred from my checking account to theirs on the first of the month like clockwork. They never said thank you, not once, not in 24 months. What they did say was that I could afford it. What they did say was that family helps family. What they did say, when I once mentioned that Lily needed braces and the estimate was $4,200 was, well, Joanna, you make good money. You'll figure it out. I figured it out. I always figured it out. And I told myself this was simply what family did. Then, 6 months ago, something changed. I was reviewing my credit report. I do it quarterly because that's what financial analysts do. We trust numbers and we verify everything. I pulled up the report on a Tuesday night after Lily went to bed. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the kitchen clock. I sat at the island with my laptop and a cup of coffee that went cold within 20 minutes because what I found made me forget it was there. There was a hard inquiry on my credit report from a credit card company I had never contacted. The application had been submitted 3 weeks earlier using my social security number, my home address, and my mother's phone number as the contact. My parents had tried to open a credit card in my name. I stared at the screen. I read it twice, 3 times. I checked the date. I checked the address. I checked the phone number. It was Marlene's cell, the same number that called me every Sunday to confirm dinner. Something inside me snapped. Not loud, not dramatic. Just a clean, quiet break. Like a bone setting itself after being bent the wrong direction for 12 years. I didn't call my mother. I didn't call my father. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I called the credit bureau. I froze my credit with all 3 agencies before midnight. Then I opened a new browser tab, searched for estate and civil attorneys in the Miami-Dade area, and wrote down one name, Robert Davis. At 11:47 p.m., I sent Robert Davis an email. 1 paragraph. No emotion, just the facts. Custodial account drained of $46,000 12 years ago, unauthorized hard inquiry 6 months prior, ongoing financial exploitation. I asked for a consultation. He replied at 7:14 the next morning. For 6 months after that, I said nothing. I went to Sunday dinners. I smiled at Marlene's jokes. I let Glenn's silence fill the room the way it always did. I watched Corey talk about his next big idea, whatever it was that week, and I nodded. I transferred the $2,400 on the first of every month. I kept the peace. But I wasn't keeping the peace anymore. I was building a case. Robert Davis and I spent those 6 months pulling records, the original custodial account statements, withdrawal authorizations signed by Glenn as custodian, bank records showing where the money went and when, the hard inquiry documentation from the credit bureau, timestamps, screenshots, email chains, everything organized, everything dated, everything filed. I was done pretending this was okay. I just hadn't told anyone yet. And then came the Sunday dinner that ended everything. It was early October, Miami suburbs, the kind of evening where the humidity sits on your skin like a second shirt even after the sun goes down. Marlene had made roast beef, which she always made when she wanted something. The good china was out. Candles on the table, a basket of rolls that Lily reached for the moment we sat down. Glenn sat at the head of the table in his usual position, hands folded, face unreadable. Corey sat across from me in a polo shirt that still had the tag crease across the chest, brand new, and I didn't have to guess who bought it. Lily sat beside me, small and quiet, her feet not quite reaching the floor. The first 20 minutes were fine. Corey talked about a new opportunity, landscaping this time, commercial accounts, big money, he said. All he needed was the right equipment. Marlene watched me while he talked. I could feel it. The way she kept glancing over, gauging my reaction, waiting for the right moment to spring whatever she'd been rehearsing all afternoon. The moment came between the roast beef and the pecan pie. "Joanna," Marlene said, setting down her fork with the kind of deliberate precision that told me this wasn't casual. "Your brother needs a cosigner for an equipment loan. $75,000. It's for Kirkland Landscaping." I kept my voice steady. "I'm not going to cosign a $75,000 loan, Mom." The table went quiet. "Excuse me?" Marlene's smile didn't drop. It hardened. "He's your brother." "I understand that, but I'm not going to cosign. Joanna Marie." She used my full name. She always used my full name when she was loading the gun. "Your brother has a real opportunity here, a real business. All he needs is someone to believe in him, and you're sitting there like some banker telling him no." "I am a banker telling him no. That's exactly what I'm doing." Corey leaned back in his chair. Typical. She thinks she's better than everyone because she pushes numbers around on a screen. I didn't respond. I just listened. Marlene turned to Lily, my 7-year-old daughter, sitting in her chair with a bread roll half-eaten in her hand, and her eyes already getting wide because she could feel the room shifting the way children always can. "Lily, sweetheart," Marlene said, and her voice dropped into that saccharine register she used when she wanted to weaponize a child. "Your mommy is being a mean, selfish girl who doesn't want your Uncle Corey to have a job. Do you want your Uncle Corey to be poor?" Lily's fork hit the edge of her plate. The small clink was the loudest sound in the room. She looked at me. Her eyes were filling. Her lower lip trembled exactly once, and then she pressed it flat because she'd already learned, at 7 years old, that crying at the Kirkland table made things worse. I felt nothing. Not anger, not pity, nothing. Just clarity. The kind of clarity that arrives when the last excuse you've been making for someone finally collapses under its own weight. "Don't speak to my daughter," I said. My voice was even, flat. "Ever again like that." "Oh, don't be dramatic, Joanna. I'm just explaining to her how families work. Something you clearly never learned." Glenn sat at the head of the table. He didn't look up. He didn't speak. His hands stayed folded. His silence was so practiced it barely registered as human. "I'm not co-signing the loan," I said, "and this conversation is over." That's when Marlene stood up. Her chair scraped backward against the tile floor. She walked around the table. She stopped beside me. I could smell her perfume, the same drugstore vanilla she'd worn since I was a child. "You're just a cold, greedy girl who doesn't care if her own brother starves. You think you're better than us because of that office job, but you're just a parasite." And then she hit me, open palm, right across the left side of my face, hard enough that my head turned, hard enough that Lily screamed, hard enough that the sound cracked through the dining room like a gunshot and hung there in the silence that followed. Corey didn't move. Glenn didn't move. The candles on the table flickered from the rush of air as Marlene's arm swung through. I stayed seated. My cheek burned. My lip had split against my teeth. I could taste copper. Lily was shaking beside me, her small hand gripping my sleeve, twisting the fabric white under her knuckles. Her breathing was fast and shallow, the kind of breathing that comes right before a child either screams or shuts down completely. She shut down. Her eyes went glassy. She stared straight ahead at her plate and stopped moving. That was the exact second I knew someone was going to pay for those words. And for that slap. And for every dollar, every silence, every stolen account, every Sunday dinner where I swallowed my own voice to keep a peace that was never peace at all. I looked at Lily. She looked back at me, 7 years old, and her eyes held something no child's eyes should ever hold. Not fear. Resignation. The quiet wasn't heavy anymore. It was sharp. It was clear. I wiped my cheek with the back of my hand. I tasted the blood on my lip one more time. I folded my napkin, placed it beside my plate, and I said 5 words. "Lily, get your coat." Lily didn't hesitate. She slid off her chair without a sound, her bread roll still sitting on the edge of her plate, and walked to the hallway closet. She moved like she'd been waiting for those words her entire life. Marlene was still standing beside my chair. Her hand was at her side, the same hand that had just struck me, and it was shaking. Not from remorse, from the adrenaline of a woman who had just crossed a line and was already rewriting the story in her head. "Joanna, sit down. You're making this into something it doesn't need to be." I pushed my chair back slowly. I stood up. I didn't look at her. I looked at the roast beef on the table, the good china, the candles still flickering, the basket of rolls my daughter had been reaching for 20 minutes ago when this house still felt like something she had to endure instead of something she had to escape. "Joanna Marie, if you walk out that door..." "I'm walking out the door." I said it the way I'd say the balance on a quarterly report. No inflection, no emotion, just the number. Corey finally spoke. "She's being dramatic. Let her go. She'll call by Tuesday." Glenn cleared his throat. The same throat clear he'd been using for 30 years. It meant nothing. It changed nothing. It was a sound effect for a man who had opted out of fatherhood decades ago and never filed the paperwork. Lily appeared at my side with her jacket already zipped. Her hand found mine, small fingers still cold from gripping that fork. I held them and walked to the front door. I didn't grab my purse from the kitchen counter. I didn't go back for Lily's coloring book on the coffee table. I didn't say goodbye. The door closed behind us, no slam. Just the quiet click of the lock catching. The car was parked at the curb under a street light that buzzed with insects in the warm October air. I buckled Lily into her booster seat. She didn't speak. I walked around to the driver's side and sat behind the wheel for exactly 12 seconds before I started the engine. In those 12 seconds, I made every decision that would follow. I wasn't going home. I was going to the police station. The drive took 14 minutes. Lily sat in the back seat with her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window at the passing strip malls and gas stations, and she didn't ask where we were going. She didn't ask why we left dinner early. She didn't ask about Grandma. She was 7 years old and she already knew that sometimes the adults in your life do things that don't deserve questions. That silence from my daughter was louder than any slap. I pulled into the parking lot of the Miami-Dade Police Department substation at exactly 8:12 p.m. The lot was half empty. The fluorescent lights inside cast a flat, blue-white glow through the glass doors. I turned off the engine and sat for a moment. "Lily," I said, "I need to go inside and talk to someone. It's going to be boring, and it might take a little while, but I need you to sit with me and be patient. Can you do that?" She nodded. "Are you okay, Mom?" "I'm okay. Your lip is bleeding." "I know." She reached into the pocket of her jacket and pulled out a crumpled napkin from dinner. She must have taken it from the table before we left. She held it out to me without a word. I pressed it to my lip. It smelled like roast beef and vanilla candles. I folded it into my pocket, and we walked inside. The officer at the front desk was a woman named Miller. She had patient eyes and a calm voice, and when she saw the split on my lip and the redness still visible on my left cheek, she didn't ask me to wait. She brought us to a small room with a plastic chair for Lily and a cup of water for me, and she took my statement. I told her everything. The dinner, the demand to co-sign a $75,000 loan, the verbal abuse directed at my 7-year-old daughter, the slap. I kept my voice steady throughout. I gave names, dates, and the address of my parents' home. I described the injury. She photographed my face under the overhead light, the split lip, the faint bruise already forming along my cheekbone. Then I reached into my phone. I opened the folder I'd labeled Davis File, 6 months of documentation, organized by date, the hard inquiry from the credit card company, the credit freeze confirmations from all 3 bureaus, the custodial account statements Robert Davis had subpoenaed showing the $46,000 withdrawal signed by Glenn Kirkland as custodian, the bank transfer records showing where that money had gone, screenshots of Marlene's phone number listed as the contact on the fraudulent credit application. I showed Officer Miller all of it. "I'd like to file 2 reports," I said. "One for the assault that occurred tonight, and one for identity theft. My parents attempted to open a credit card in my name approximately 6 months ago using my social security number without my knowledge or consent." She looked at the screen. She looked at the photographs. She looked at Lily, who was sitting in the plastic chair drawing on the back of a police department pamphlet with a pen someone had given her. "I'll get a detective," she said. The detective's name was Anderson. He spent 45 minutes with me. I answered every question the same way I present a financial audit. Facts, dates, figures, documentation. No emotion, no editorializing. Just the architecture of 12 years of theft and 6 months of fraud, laid out in a sequence so clean it barely needed explanation. At 9:47 p.m., I walked out of the station with case numbers for both reports and a victim's advocate card I tucked into my wallet behind Lily's school photo. Lily fell asleep in the car on the way home. I carried her inside, put her to bed, and sat at the kitchen island with my laptop. The house was dark, except for the screen. The street light cut through the blinds and striped the counter in pale yellow bars. I opened my email and typed one message. "Robert, both reports are filed. Case numbers attached. Please proceed with the civil action for recovery of the $46,000 custodial account funds, plus accrued interest. I'm also formally ending the monthly transfers effective immediately." I read it twice. I pressed send. The soft, unmistakable click of the trackpad echoed in the dead silence of the kitchen. Then I opened the banking app. I navigated to the recurring transfers. There it was, $2,400 scheduled for the first of every month. Payee Glenn and Marlene Kirkland, 24 months of payments, $57,600 sent into a house that had never once sent anything back. I tapped the transfer. I tapped edit. I tapped cancel. The status changed to inactive. I set the phone down on the counter, screen side up, and stared at it. I waited to feel something. Guilt, grief, fear. Nothing came. The only thing I felt was the absence of weight. Like I'd been carrying a bag of gravel up a hill for 12 years and someone had finally cut the strap. I sat there for a long time in the dark kitchen, listening to the house settle and Lily breathing softly down the hall, and I didn't move until the coffee I'd forgotten to make seemed pointless to start. The next 48 hours happened with the precision of a wire transfer. Robert Davis filed the civil suit for breach of fiduciary duty on Monday morning. The claim was straightforward. $46,000 in custodial funds withdrawn by Glenn Kirkland without the beneficiary's authorization, plus $14,820 in calculated interest at market rates over 12 years. Total demanded $60,820. The papers were served at my parents' home on Tuesday at 3:17 p.m. I know the exact time because that's when my phone started buzzing. It buzzed like an angry hornet trapped in a jar and didn't stop for 3 hours. Marlene called 14 times. I let every call go to voicemail. Glenn called twice, which was more phone activity than he'd shown in a decade, and I let those go too. Corey sent 9 text messages in 11 minutes, each one longer and more furious than the last. I read none of them. I muted the conversation and set my phone face down on my desk at work. At 6:14 p.m., Marlene finally left a voicemail I listened to, not because I wanted to hear it, because Robert had advised me to document everything. Her voice was high and cracked, oscillating between rage and something that wanted to sound like pain, but landed closer to panic. Joanna Marie Kirkland, what have you done? You're suing your own parents over money from 15 years ago? Your grandfather would be ashamed of you? You are tearing this family apart. And for what? For what, Joanna? I saved the voicemail. I forwarded it to Robert. 3 days later, the real phone call came. The one I'd been expecting since I watched Corey's face at that dinner table, smug and certain that everything would work out the way it always did for him. It was Thursday morning. I was at my desk reviewing a client portfolio when my phone lit up. Corey's name. I picked up. I put it on speaker. I set the phone on my desk and continued typing. You need to call whatever lawyer you hired and make this go away right now, Corey said. His voice was tight. Not angry. Tight. Scared tight. Why? Because I went to the bank this morning for the equipment loan, the $75,000, and they denied me. They said there's a fraud flag on the family's financial history. They said there's an open investigation. They said my application is on hold pending resolution. I kept typing. The keyboard clicks filled the silence between his words. Joanna, are you listening to me? I'm listening. You did this. You put that flag there. You froze something or reported something, and now my loan is dead. My business is dead. Kirkland Landscaping is dead before it even started. The credit freeze has been there for 6 months, Corey. I froze my credit after I discovered that Mom and Dad tried to open a credit card in my name using my social security number. That's identity theft. The fraud flag exists because fraud was committed. Silence. Then breathing. Hard, uneven breathing. The kind that comes when someone is trying to find an angle and realizing there isn't one. You need to fix this? I don't need to do anything. Joanna, the civil suit demands $60,820. That's the $46,000 from my custodial account that Dad drained 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, plus $14,820 in accrued interest. The identity theft case is separate and criminal. I didn't create these problems, Corey. I documented them. This is insane? Over some old savings account? Over $46,000 that Grandpa put away for my future. Over a credit card application filed in my name without my consent. Over 24 months of transfers totaling $57,600 that no one ever once said thank you for. Over a slap across my face in front of my 7-year-old daughter. I heard him swallow. You're destroying this family. I'm not destroying anything. I'm recovering what was stolen and protecting what's mine. He hung up. I saved the call log. I forwarded the timestamp to Robert. That evening, the doorbell rang at 8. I was sitting on the couch with Lily, who was doing her spelling homework with her legs tucked underneath her. The bell rang 3 times in quick succession, the kind of ringing that isn't a request. It's a demand. I looked through the peephole. Marlene and Glenn. Marlene's mascara had smudged beneath her eyes. Glenn's shirt was untucked. His face carried something I'd never seen on it before. Not guilt exactly, but the dawning recognition that silence had a price, and the bill had finally arrived. I opened the door 6 inches. I kept my hand on the frame. "Joanna," Marlene started, and her voice had dropped the rage. It was smaller now, controlled, rehearsed. "We need to talk about this like a family." "We're not going to do that." "Baby, please. This lawsuit, the police reports, all of it, it's too much. We can work this out. We've always worked things out." "No, Marlene, I've always worked things out. I've written the checks. I've covered the mortgage. I've swallowed the insults and the silence and the favoritism, and I've done it for 24 months without hearing the words, 'thank you,' a single time. That's not working things out. That's being used." Glenn opened his mouth. The first time I'd heard him attempt to speak in what felt like years. "Joanna, your mother, and I..." "Don't." I held up one hand. "You sat at that table and watched her slap me. You watched her use my daughter as a weapon. You said nothing. You've been saying nothing my entire life. Your silence isn't neutrality, Dad. It's permission, and I'm done accepting it." Marlene's eyes were wet. Her chin trembled. She reached for the doorframe. "What about Lily? She's our granddaughter. You can't just..." "You use Lily. You looked my 7-year-old daughter in the eye and tried to manipulate her into guilting me over a loan. You put fear in her face for a $75,000 cosign. Don't say her name to me right now." "Joanna, I'm not cold, Mother. I'm just finished paying for your mistakes, and I'm finished letting you teach my daughter that this is what love looks like." Marlene stared at me. Glenn stared at the ground. The porch light hummed above us, drawing moths in slow circles. "The lawsuit stands," I said. "The $2,400 monthly transfers are canceled. Permanently. The fraud investigation will proceed regardless of anything I do because it's a criminal matter now, and this conversation is over." "You're killing us, Joanna." "No, I'm just not keeping you alive anymore." I stepped back. I placed my hand on the door. "Family isn't a debt you pay. It's a respect you earn. You haven't earned it in a long time." I looked at my mother one last time. I looked at my father. I saw everything I'd spent 30 years pretending wasn't there. The entitlement, the indifference, the small and constant cruelty of people who had mistaken my love for weakness and my generosity for obligation. The door closed softly, no slam. Just the quiet click of the lock sliding into place. I walked back to the couch. Lily looked up from her spelling words. Her pencil was still in her hand. Her eyes searched my face, looking for damage, looking for tears, looking for the signs she'd learned to read at dinner tables and in quiet hallways. "Who was that?" she asked. "Nobody important," I said. She held my gaze for a moment, then she nodded, looked back at her worksheet, and said, "Can you quiz me on these when I'm done?" "Of course." I sat beside her. The house was quiet. The porch light clicked off on its timer. Outside, I heard a car start, pull away from the curb, and fade into the distance until the only sound left was Lily's pencil scratching against paper and the steady rhythm of a house that finally belonged to just the two of us. The cut was clean. I went through my phone that night after Lily fell asleep. I sat at the kitchen island in the dark, the screen casting a pale glow across my hands, and I did what I should have done years ago. I blocked Marlene's number. I blocked Glenn's number. I blocked Corey's number. I removed myself from the Kirkland family group chat, the one Marlene had created 3 years ago that was mostly Bible verses on Mondays and guilt by Wednesday. I deleted the text thread with Corey without reading the messages that had piled up since Tuesday. I removed Glenn and Marlene from Lily's school emergency contact list. I archived every email from every Kirkland address into a folder labeled Davis File Communications and set a filter to send any future messages directly there, unread, documented, untouched. I didn't do it in anger. I did it in clarity. When I finished, I set the phone down and looked at the dark kitchen. The refrigerator hummed. The street light cut through the blinds the way it always did. Nothing in the room had changed, but the air felt different, lighter, like the first real breath I'd taken in years. A full breath, all the way down, with nothing sitting on my chest. I went to bed at 11:22 p.m. I slept through the night for the first time in months. The weeks that followed were quiet in the way I imagine the ocean is quiet after a storm passes. Still, flat, almost unnervingly peaceful. Lily went to school. I went to work. We ate dinner together at our kitchen table, just the two of us, and nobody raised their voice, and nobody asked for money, and nobody used a 7-year-old as a bargaining chip over pecan pie. Robert Davis handled everything. The civil suit moved forward with the efficiency of a process that had airtight documentation behind it. Glenn and Marlene retained a lawyer, a man named Wilson from a strip mall practice in Hialeah, who sent exactly one counteroffer suggesting the custodial account withdrawal had been a family financial decision made in good faith. Robert responded with the withdrawal authorization signed solely by Glenn, the bank records showing a new truck purchased for Corey 3 months later, and the credit bureau documentation proving the unauthorized hard inquiry on my identity. The counteroffer was withdrawn within a week. The criminal investigation into the identity theft moved on its own timeline. A detective from the fraud division contacted me twice for follow-up documentation, and both times I provided everything within 24 hours. Timestamps, screenshots, the credit freeze confirmations, the application record with Marlene's phone number listed as primary contact. I didn't seek updates on what happened next. I didn't need to. The information arrived the way it always does when a family collapses in a small community. Through Robert. Through mutual acquaintances, through the quiet, persistent gravity of consequences finding their level. 3 months after the civil suit was filed, Glenn and Marlene settled. They didn't go to trial. They couldn't afford to. Wilson advised them that a judge would almost certainly rule in my favor given the documentation, and the legal fees for a full proceeding would exceed what they owed. The judgment was $60,820, $46,000 in principal, $14,820 in accrued interest. They didn't have $60,820. They didn't have half of it. To satisfy the judgment, Glenn and Marlene put the house on the market. The same house with the dining room table where Marlene had slapped me. The same kitchen where she'd made roast beef when she wanted something. The same driveway where I'd watched Corey climb into his brand new truck at 16, while my college fund sat at zero. The house was listed at $310,000. It sold for $278,000 after sitting on the market for 11 weeks. After the remaining mortgage balance, closing costs, and the $60,820 settlement payment, they walked away with less than $40,000. They moved into a 2-bedroom apartment off Coral Way with shared laundry in the basement and a parking lot that flooded every time it rained, which in Miami meant weekly. The $2,400 monthly transfers had stopped the night I pressed cancel. Within 60 days, the absence of that money did what I'd always suspected it would. It revealed that Glenn and Marlene's entire financial existence had been built on my invisible support. The mortgage payments slipped first, then the car insurance, then the credit card minimums. The house was already behind before the judgment accelerated the collapse. Glenn, 62 years old and retired for nearly a decade, started driving for a rideshare company. I heard this from a colleague at work whose neighbor recognized him behind the wheel of a 10-year-old sedan with a cracked dashboard and a phone mount suctioned to the windshield. He drove nights, mostly airport runs and bar closes. The man who had sat at the head of every table in silence now sat behind a steering wheel in silence, ferrying strangers through the same suburbs where he used to own a home. Marlene took a part-time position at a dry cleaner 4 blocks from the apartment. She worked the front counter. I didn't learn this from her. I learned it from Robert, who mentioned it in passing during one of our final consultations, the way you mention weather. Just a fact. Neither of us commented on it further. Corey's landscaping business never started. The $75,000 equipment loan had been denied, and the fraud flag ensured that no lender in the Miami-Dade area would touch an application with the Kirkland name attached until the investigation resolved. Without startup capital, without equipment, without the co-signer he'd assumed would always be there, Kirkland Landscaping existed only as a name Corey had printed on 200 business cards that sat in a shoebox in his childhood bedroom, which was now a bedroom in a 2-bedroom apartment he shared with his parents. 8 months after the Sunday dinner, Corey was working night shifts at a warehouse distribution center off the Palmetto Expressway, $17.50 an hour, loading pallets from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. He drove the same truck Glenn and Marlene had bought him at 16, except now it was 8 years old. The custom wheels had been sold to cover a credit card payment, and the lifted suspension rattled over every speed bump in the apartment complex parking lot. The identity theft case resulted in a formal charge against Marlene, misdemeanor fraudulent use of personal identification. She avoided jail time through a first offender diversion program that required 40 hours of community service and a financial literacy course. The irony of Marlene Kirkland sitting in a classroom learning about responsible credit management was not lost on me, but I didn't dwell on it. I didn't dwell on any of it. I heard through the current that Glenn and Marlene's Sunday dinners stopped entirely. No more roast beef, no more good china, no more candles on the table. The apartment didn't have a dining room. It had a breakfast bar with 2 stools and a television mounted on the wall that played too loud because the neighbors on both sides played theirs louder. Someone told Robert that Marlene had said at some point during those 8 months, if only we treated her differently. Robert mentioned it to me during our final meeting, the one where he confirmed the settlement had been paid in full and the case was closed. I didn't respond. There was nothing to add. 1 year later, everything had changed. Lily and I moved to an apartment in Coral Gables with a fenced courtyard and a lemon tree outside the kitchen window. Lily's bedroom had a ceiling fan that wobbled slightly and walls. I let her paint seafoam green because she'd seen the color in a magazine and said it looked like the ocean was hugging you. She was right. It did. She made honor roll that spring. She joined a swim team at the community center and came home on Tuesdays and Thursdays with chlorine in her hair and stories about a girl named Abby who could do a backflip off the low board. She laughed more. She slept through the night. She stopped flinching when someone raised their voice in a grocery store or a restaurant. One evening in March, we were sitting on the courtyard patio eating takeout pasta. The lemon tree was blooming. The air smelled like citrus and warm concrete. Lily had sauce on her chin and was telling me about a science project involving baking soda volcanoes, and she stopped mid-sentence and looked at me. Mom? Yeah? Do you remember Grandma's house? I set my fork down. I do. She was quiet for a moment. She twirled her pasta around her fork twice without eating it. I'm glad we don't go there anymore, she said. Nobody made me feel small here. She went back to her pasta. I went back to mine. The courtyard was quiet except for the sound of a neighbor's sprinkler clicking through its cycle and a mockingbird in the lemon tree that didn't know when to quit. That was enough. That was everything. 6 months after we moved, I started a personal finance blog. I called it The Invisible Wallet. I wrote about what no one teaches you: how to audit your own family for financial abuse, how to freeze your credit, how to recognize when generosity has become exploitation, how to build boundaries that don't bend. I wrote at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed, the same way I'd once sat at that table documenting evidence, except now the documents were lessons and the evidence was survival. The blog hit 50,000 subscribers within a year. I never heard from Glenn or Marlene or Corey again. No calls, no texts, no unexpected doorbell rings on quiet evenings. The number stayed blocked. The emails stayed filtered. The emergency contacts stayed updated with people who had earned the privilege. Some nights, after Lily was asleep and the courtyard was dark and the lemon tree was just a silhouette against the Coral Gables sky, I'd sit at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and listen to the silence. Not the silence of a man who refuses to speak. Not the silence of a woman swallowing her own voice to keep a false peace. Just silence. Clean, ordinary, unweighted silence. The kind that doesn't ask anything of you. I thought about my grandfather sometimes. The man who'd put money into that custodial account every birthday, every Christmas, every time he sold a piece from his workshop. He didn't leave me $46,000. He left me the knowledge that someone once had believed I was worth investing in. That was the inheritance they couldn't drain. That was the balance that never hit zero. Setting boundaries isn't cruel. It's protection. Blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. Loyalty earns its place. I never regretted a single second of it. Some doors close so better ones can open. If you enjoyed this story about protecting your children and knowing your worth, hit that like button and let me know what you think in the comments. And if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell for more stories just like this one. Thanks for watching.